We're starting a new theme tonight. Over the last 3 months, we've been following a theme that we've called Thus Have I Heard. And we've been looking at discourses from what is called the Pali Canon, the collection of the Buddha's discourses and stories about the Buddha recorded in a language called Pali. Which were passed on as an oral tradition. They were passed on for perhaps 400 years as an oral tradition. Hence the title, Thus Have I Heard, because they just about all begin with those words, Thus have I heard. People are saying, this is what I've heard and I'm passing it on. So Thus have I heard. Looking at these discourses, which really represent, as close as we can get to the actual words of the Buddha. They're stories set in real places that you can still visit, where the Buddha encounters people who are much like people today in many ways and gives them individual teachings. And it's as close as we get to the actual words of the Buddha, the actual teachings of the Buddha. But tonight we're beginning a new series. And instead of looking at these texts from the Pali Canon, as close as we can get to the words of the Buddha, we're going to be looking at texts from the next great phase of development of the Buddhist tradition. And we're not going to be doing this from academic interest, okay? This is, we're not trying to do a sort of evening class in Buddhist history or Buddhist development. What we're interested in is how we can use the teachings in these texts, how we can use the ideas in these texts to help us to live more meaningfully, with more fulfillment, to live better. Because these texts, they contain an absolute wealth of wisdom that we can apply to our lives here and now, although they had their origin maybe 2,000 years ago, maybe 1,500 years ago. So, for maybe 400 years, the Buddha's words were passed on as this oral tradition. Changed in the process, no doubt, in some cases. Different emphases given to them. Some teachings were lost. But maybe 500 years or a bit more after the Buddha's passing, while these oral traditions, incidentally, were still being written down, the Pali Canon was still being written down, a new type of Buddhist text began to appear, which were called Mahayana Sutras. So, several things to say about that. The texts in the Pali Canon were called suttas. And sutta, it means thread. It's related to our word suture, which anyone from the medical profession will understand. So they were a thread, they were a discourse, a thread. And that's Pali, and these Mahayana Sutras were called sutra, which is just the same word in Sanskrit. And they were Mahayana Sutras. Maha means great, big, enormous, wonderful. Yana means path or vehicle. So it's sometimes translated as great way, great vehicle. So the people who were behind these Mahayana Sutras, this new style of Buddhist text, were saying that the way they were suggesting was a greater way, a bigger way. Now, scholars argue, as scholars do, about the origin and development of this Mahayana tradition. But what we know for absolutely certain, is that the great texts of this tradition, the great Mahayana Sutras, tell a particular story. They tell a particular story. They've got a take on things. And the story they tell is that maybe many people in the Buddhist tradition by that time seem to have lost sight of the spirit of the Buddhist teachings. Even if they still practiced to the letter, even if they still practiced obsessively to the letter, they'd somehow lost sight of the spirit. Because they were practicing purely from a sort of self-centered motivation. The motivation was seeking their own liberation from negative mental states, seeking liberating insight for themselves, but not seeing that in any bigger context. Not seeing that as a way to benefit others, not seeing it as a way to benefit the world. And that is not in keeping with what the Buddha taught. In the Pali Canon, we hear the Buddha teaching his followers over and over again that they should practice for the welfare of the many. And for the welfare of the many is the title of this next series of talks, okay? For the welfare of the many. So the Buddha says, go forth and teach the Dharma, which is good in the middle, good in the beginning, good in the end, for the welfare of the many. For the welfare of the many. For the well-being of gods and humans. The Buddha seemed to have a vision in which his renunciant followers, who sort of slept under trees and begged for their food, and the normal householders in the towns and the villages, that those two groups existed in a sort of mutually beneficial symbiosis, where the householders provided food. They provided food for the renunciants. And the renunciants, who were free to practice full time, to do a lot of meditation, a lot of reflection on the Dharma, they provided teaching, they provided wisdom, they provided exemplification, they provided inspiration, they provided guidance, so that the two together formed something much, much greater than either on their own. Together, they were part of a project to raise the level of ethics and awareness of the whole human race, if you like. You needed both parts to make that work. They were part of a project to help consciousness on this planet to evolve to a higher level. So the Buddha told his followers to wander, etc., for the welfare of the many, for the well-being of gods and humans. And when groups of his followers lost the plot, which they did surprisingly often, actually, you'd think that they were all completely wonderful, but sometimes they think, really? They got up to that. When they lost the plot, the Buddha would tell them off. Presumably he'd tell them off with great kindness, but he would tell them off. He would tell them off. And sometimes he would say, this will cause you suffering for a long, long time. So it's about you, you're going to suffer because of this. But he would also frequently say, you are not acting for the welfare of the many. This is not for the welfare of the many. And he would say, one of the things that crops up a few times when he's telling people he's off is, you are wasting the country's alms food. You are wasting the country's alms food. So there's this symbiosis, but you're not playing your part in it. You're not playing your part in this mutually beneficial project to raise the level of awareness of us humans. You're eating the householders' alms food. They are doing their bit. They're giving you the food, but you are not playing your part. You are wasting the country's alms food. So that was a spirit in which the Buddha encouraged his followers to practice the Dharma for the welfare of the many. For the welfare of the many. It wasn't just about getting beyond your negative mental states and feeling sort of completely free. It wasn't just about that. So that was the spirit in which the Buddha encouraged his followers to practice the Dharma. But the sutras of the Mahayana, the sutras of this great vehicle, definitely seem to imply that this spirit had been lost in at least some quarters of the Dharma. That many monks and nuns in particular, the monastics in particular, were practicing with this selfish motivation for their own individual liberation from suffering without a sort of eye to the greater good. And these sutras, these Mahayana sutras, they strongly emphasized a return to what we could see as the original spirit of practicing for the welfare of the many. And as part of that spirit, part of that re-emphasis on that spirit, they, if you like, came up with a restatement of the Buddhist goal. I don't think it's a different goal, but it's a different emphasis, if you like, and it was called the Bodhisattva ideal. So Bodhi means enlightened wisdom. It means wisdom, it means liberation. Sorry, some people can't see. Bodhi means wisdom, liberation, enlightenment, awakening. Sattva means being. So a bodhisattva, you could translate it literally as wisdom being. Wisdom being, enlightenment being. And a bodhisattva is a Buddhist who is not just aiming, definitely not just aiming for their own enlightenment, but is seeking to grow towards enlightenment so that they can be of more use, so that they can help others to also grow to higher and happier levels of consciousness. That is why they are practicing. They are practicing to make progress themselves in order to help others to make similar progress. So a bodhisattva is not just interested in enlightenment for themselves, they're aiming for enlightenment for all of us. That's the aim, enlightenment for all of us. And the myth of the bodhisattva, and there's a myth of the bodhisattva, and I have to stress this is a myth, we shouldn't take it literally, is that the bodhisattva refuses to enter nirvana until all beings can enter nirvana. So the myth runs they could become enlightened and vanish into this completely different dimension at death. But instead they opt to stay here in this world with all its sort of grunge and whatnot, to postpone their enlightenment, to postpone their vanishing into this inconceivable, deathless, blissful state, until all beings can also follow them, until all beings are also enlightened. So that they can stay here to help all beings become enlightened. That's the sort of myth, that's the mythic story around the Bodhisattva ideal. So there's an analogy that's sometimes quoted for this. The analogy runs like this. We're asked to imagine that because we're sort of spiritually fit, because we practice the Dharma, imagine that's analogous to us being a physically fit, strong, young man. So we're asked to imagine that we're part of a party. We're this fit person, really fit, strong person. And we're part of a party that is making its way through a dangerous, difficult wilderness, with all sorts of dangerous animals, poisonous snakes, bandits, rivers we have to cross, cliffs we've got to scale, all sorts of things like that. We're asked to imagine that we are this fit, strong person, but in that party we are travelling with, there are also weak people, and sick people, and old people, and children, and mothers with babies. And the question is then put to us, we are asked, would we, being young and fit and strong, set out on our own, leaving all the others to fend for themselves because they're going to slow us down? Or would we, being one of the strong, fit ones, would we stay with the party so that we can help? That's the analogy that's given. Are we after individual liberation, or do we want to stay and help others? Would we just be concerned to escape ourselves, or would we be concerned to help everybody escape? Another analogy that's used is we're in jail, we're all in jail, and we're not just interested in breaking out ourselves, we want to organise a mass breakout. So the person who practices the Dharma just to be more liberated themselves is like, in the analogy, like the fit young person who leaves all the less strong and the less fit and the encumbered people to their fate, which seems a bit cheap, really. It's a bit of a cheap thing to do, whereas the Bodhisattva is like the strong, fit person who postpones their own escape from the wilderness to help everybody in the party escape as well. So that's quite a good analogy for this myth that the Bodhisattva postpones their own enlightenment to help others to grow towards enlightenment. But as Sangha has pointed out, this is just a myth. This is just a myth. It's not as though we sort of vanish into some other dimension. We shouldn't take it literally. The Bodhisattva does not postpone their enlightenment. What a silly idea, in a way. In fact, to practice like a Bodhisattva, to practice more for others and less for oneself, is precisely to become more enlightened. That's what being more enlightened means. It means to be more about others than oneself. It is precisely to be more enlightened. So to practice this way is to take a big step towards enlightenment. Not to just be thinking about, I could make myself happier, I could make myself more free from negative mental states. To practice that way is a big step towards enlightenment because it means taking a big step out of our self-obsession. It's a big step beyond our central, overwhelming delusion, which is that I am the centre of the universe and you lot can go hang, basically. I must focus on me because I am the centre of the universe, which, whether we like it or not, is actually how we see things. We might not admit that, but that's how we see things. So the point of this myth about postponing enlightenment is that it's advising us not to focus just on becoming happier or having more positive mental states ourselves, but it's telling us that a far healthier and more effective way of practice is to seek to develop ourselves, yes, to become wiser, more in control of our mental states, so that we can be of more use to others, so that we can have a beneficial effect on others, so that we can help to liberate others, so that we can be part of this project of raising the level of consciousness on our planet and not just about becoming happier ourselves. So anyway, I've talked about the Bodhisattva ideal, and I've talked about it in the context of Buddhist history and how it arose 500 years and then maybe beyond after the Buddha's death as a response to the fact that perhaps some people had lost sight of the spirit of the Buddha's teaching. But the Bodhisattva idea is not just a sort of historical interest. It's not just of historical interest. What it's pointing to is really, really important for our practice here and now, actually. And I think that's especially true because Buddhism, maybe especially Buddhism in the West, there's this strong tendency to see Buddhist practice in very individualistic terms. All too often it's about me. It's still about me. It's about my meditation, my mental states, my insight. And as long as it's still about me, it's missing something. And maybe this sort of meism, this individualistic practice, maybe it's not even just confined to the West, because Sangha tells a story. It tells a story about a Buddhist businessman he knew in India, who every morning would do the metta bhavana. Every morning, religiously, he would do the metta bhavana. And every morning, when he'd finished his meditation, his servant would sort of know the timing, and his servant would come in with a tray with some tea. He would bring him a pot of tea every morning as he finished his metta bhavana. But one morning, maybe he got really concentrated, or maybe the servant got his timings a bit wrong. But anyway, the servant came into the meditation room with a tray of tea while the businessman was still doing the 5th stage of the metta bhavana. And this so enraged the businessman that he shouted at his servants, "Get out of here, you stupid man! Can't you see I'm trying to develop metaphor beings?" And okay, that's a joke. Okay, that's a bit of a joke. But our practice can be a bit like that. It can easily become just another aspect of our culture's focus on me, me, me. Even our metta bhavana can be about me feeling lovely metta. Oh, isn't it nice to feel lovely metta? And not about other people, not about how I could be of more use and help other people. Even our metta bhavana can be about me. But getting beyond this focus on me is exactly what the Dharma is all about. The Buddha tells us that this focus on me is what causes us suffering. It's a delusion. We focus on my wants, my fears, my anxieties. And that is the capital way to be unhappy, because it is completely out of keeping with the nature of reality, in which this me is just an invention, actually. Because we are so interconnected to others, so supported by others. So the Dharma is about going beyond this exclusive focus on me, towards a more expansive vision on life, in which we focus more on us rather than on me. So to practice in a way that is all about me, my mental states, my meditation, my insight, is just not going to work. At least it's not going to work in the long run. It's about getting beyond me, so how is being about me going to help? It's like hurrying up to calm down. It's like being in a hurry to calm down. The means is in conflict with the end. Now, okay, having said that, we all probably start out practicing the Dharma for our own benefit, to become happier, healthier human beings. Pretty much all of us, that's why we start practicing the Dharma. And there is absolutely nothing at all wrong with that. We need to start that way. We need to cultivate a positive mind. We need to cultivate positive emotion. We need to free ourselves from the negative mental states that drag us down. We need to become wiser, stronger, more in control of our minds, more energetic. And maybe we need to focus on all of that for quite a long time, actually. Maybe that needs to be the main focus of our practice for quite a long time. But after a while, practicing just for ourselves, I think, is bound to run out of steam. And we need to make some sort of a shift towards practicing with others in mind as well. This is what the Bodhisattva ideal is getting at. This shift, I think, tends to happen quite naturally, because the more we practice, the more we become emotionally positive, the less we think about just ourselves and the more we think about others. So it sort of happens quite naturally. But whatever stage we're practicing at, whatever stage of our practice we're at, even if we've just started out and we're still thinking very much in terms of becoming happier and healthier, we can still speed up our progress by beginning to think more in terms of how we can benefit others and not just ourselves, as well as how we benefit ourselves. That will speed up our practice. Firstly, because that is actually a more effective way of practice. It's a more effective way to go beyond our limited sense of self. So there's a Tibetan teacher called Tsongkhapa, medieval, 11th century, something like that. Anyway, this is a quote from Tsongkhapa. There is a one-sidedness about practicing for our own benefit, which means that we do not even benefit ourselves, let alone others. There is a completeness about practicing for the benefit of others, which means that we do benefit others, and in the process we bring about our own benefit as well. So there's something about shifting that emphasis a bit, which actually makes our practice more effective. That's the first, I think, thing that the Bodhisattva ideal is telling us that we can bring into our practice. And the second reason we need to practice more that way, or bring more of that into our practice, is because practicing that way is simply an expression of reality. It is in harmony with the reality of non-self, the reality of our interconnectedness with other people and the world around us. So if you cast your mind back to the introductory course, we saw how we don't really exist as separate, independent beings. We exist because we're infinitely connected to others and the world around us. We're kept in existence by others and the world around us. We depend on others and the world around us. We can't sort of be taken as a separate entity. We don't exist as separate, independent entities. We exist as part of this network of conditions. So we don't exist as separate, independent selves. And to seek our happiness as though we were separate, independent selves doesn't work. Selfishness is self-defeating, even when that selfishness is a sort of spiritual selfishness. So that's a bit about the Bodhisattva ideal, and why it is just as relevant to us as it was to Buddhists 2,000 years ago. Because there is this real, I think, near enemy of the Dharma, which is very, very common in the West, which is the sort of Buddhism of me, me, me. It's all about me. It's all about me having nice mental states, me having good meditations. Get out of my room. I'm trying to develop metta for all beings. Me and my insight. It makes me special, and all of that is inimical to the Dharma. It's just another way of being selfishness, another way of being selfish, and another way of being obsessed with me, me, me. So it's about going beyond me, me, me. So because that, I will say one thing about that, that near enemy of the Dharma, one particular feature of that near enemy of the Dharma is that people that practice that way tend to avoid the whole business of Sangha, right? Because Sangha is real people. And if what you want to do is sort of retire to your bedroom and just have lovely mental states without actually becoming any less self-centered, Sangha gets in the way. Yeah. So I think one of the features of Buddhism that isn't Buddhism light, that isn't me, me, me Buddhism, is an emphasis on Sangha. So I think that's our touchstone when we're looking at different sort of traditions of Buddhism. Is it me, me, me Buddhism, or is it Buddhism that actually demands that we come into real relationship with real people? Anyway, this Bodhisattva ideal is a strand that runs through just about all Mahayana texts, okay? And it's worth saying that just about the great majority of Buddhists who have ever existed have been Mahayana Buddhists, okay? Most of the traditions of Buddhism are Mahayana, and huge numbers of people have been sort of enrolled by the Mahayana tradition. And this Bodhisattva idea runs through just about all Mahayana texts, but the one text that describes it most accessibly, most explicitly, and I think most inspiringly, is a long Sanskrit poem called the Bodhicharya Avatara. So we finally get to a text. Hooray. That's my fee. Yeah. It's really the amount of money that we made from our summer fair to give away to good causes. Which is a sort of bit of bodhisattva activity, isn't it? The Bodhicharya Avatara. So, Bodhi again. Wisdom, awakening, enlightenment. Charya, way. It's related to our word path, our word car. Something that moves. It's like a chariot, car, that sort of thing. Things that move, things that get you somewhere. Avatara, guide. Guide to the path of wisdom, guide to the way of enlightenment, sometimes translated, especially by Tibetans, as guide to the Bodhisattva's way of life. So very related to this whole idea of the Bodhisattva ideal. And this is one of the most important texts, I think, of Mahayana Buddhism, the classic era of Mahayana Buddhism. It was the first text that Sangha actually led study on when he founded the Triratna order. And the Dalai Lama says he reads it every day, and that it's his main inspiration. And it was written by a guy called Shantideva, who lived in the 8th century, 7th century, around there. And Shantideva lived at the great Buddhist monastic university of Nalanda in northern India, which some of us, I think, have been to on the pilgrimage. It's just piles of bricks now, but at the time it was, I think, the largest university in the world. So it's said. So he lived at this great monastic university of Nalanda. And there's a story told about him. So, the writer of this incredibly influential text, apparently, he was a bit of a joke. So the other monks never saw him get out of bed, except to eat and defecate. And they called him the monk of the three attainments. So the three attainments were eating, sleeping, and defecating. The monk of the three attainments. So he was this joke. I was like, certainly wasting the country's alms food, just this complete waste of space guy. So, and apparently there was this tradition at Nalanda that every now and then somebody would give this sort of like keynote speech. Some big sort of famous monk person would be invited to stand up and address the whole massive gathering. It was a real honour. And it was only ever done by, the people who are really worth listening to. And they thought, well, somebody, which just goes to show that Buddhists aren't always very nice, has to be said, because somebody came up with the idea, let's invite Shantideva, let's really show him up. He's clearly a complete waste of space, he doesn't know anything about the Dharma, and we'll get him to deliver this talk to this huge assembly. And he would just die of embarrassment and have to leave. It's just a complete, get rid of him. So they invite him to give this talk to the massive assembly. And Shantideva goes up to give this talk to the massive assembly, and what he delivers verbatim is this beautiful, beautiful Sanskrit poetry, which is the Bodhicharya Avatara. And it's said that while he was delivering it, I can't remember which bit, there's a certain point in which he rose into the air, and he delivered the final chapter from somewhere in the air, and then vanished. And then reappeared somewhere, living among the lowest of the low, the really sort of destitute people in the lowest slums, practicing the Dharma and helping such people instead of living among these rather privileged but clearly not very nice monks. So it's a nice story. But it's a bit unlikely, actually. I have to say, but not just the detail of rising into the air and vanishing. Okay, I mean, I think that's one of the least unlikely bits of the story. He rose into the air and vanished, but the idea that he was seen as quite such a waster, because he also wrote something else. He wrote a thing called the Shiksa Samuchaya, the Guide to the Path of Practice, which is a really extensive work of scholarship referencing hundreds of Mahayana sutras, many of which we have no access to at all. We only know them through the fact that he references them and brings out points from them. To write the Shiksa Samuchaya, he must have spent ages in the library. He must have been an incredible scholar, and presumably he did that before he vanished into the air. And it was passed on through the tradition of Nalanda, so it seems very unlikely he would have been regarded as quite such a waster. Okay, it's a nice story. It's a cautionary tale about not judging others. That's great. It tells us don't judge others you don't know, but it's not probably a realistic story about Shantideva. But be that as I may, it is one of the most accessible, explicit, and inspiring guides to the Bodhisattva ideal. And it very much brings out the two features I talked about earlier. Firstly, that focusing just on ourselves is not the way to make spiritual progress or even to be happy, and that we're actually more likely to make spiritual progress and be happy if we focus more on others, if we are more connected rather than more separate. So it brings out that, and it also brings out that practicing for others as well as that oneself, trying to become more loving, more aware, more in control of our mental states, but not for ourselves so that we can have a positive impact, is actually an expression of reality, because it's an expression of interconnectedness. It's an expression of how connected we are to the world around us. It's an expression of non-self. So to take a step towards practicing that way is to take a step towards wisdom. It's to take a step towards enlightenment. So, okay, a few things. There's lots about the Bodhisattva ideal in the Bodhicharya-avatar. A lot of it's really down-to-earth stuff about how to be more mindful, how to be less reactive, more patient, how to be more vigorous and energetic. Loads and loads of stuff. Loads of how to meditate, loads and loads of stuff. And wisdom. But I just choose a few verses. Just choose a few verses to look at. So, okay. Just as I love and cherish my body, which is divided into many limbs, so I should love and cherish this whole world, which is divided into many beings. Okay. So it makes it clear here, isn't it, that Shantideva sees the Bodhisattva ideal as an expression of connectedness, relatedness, non-self. Just as our limbs are not really separate, we could talk about my arm and my leg, but they're not separate from me. Just as our limbs are not really separate, they're connected parts of a larger whole. In just the same way, I am not separate from you. We are not separate from others. We are not separate from the world around us. We are interconnected parts of a larger whole. So it's using that analogy of the limbs of the body with us, if you like. So it's bringing out the wisdom aspect. It's bringing out the interconnectedness aspect. Okay, the next verse. No, it's not quite the next verse. It's the next verse in a slightly shortened version. I should dispel the suffering of others because it is suffering like my own suffering. I should help others because they are living beings, as I am a living being. When we all want happiness and we all fear suffering, what is so special about me that I only look after myself? So what is so special about me? What's so special about me? What's so special about you? We all think, to ourselves, we're like the centre of the universe. This is trying to get us to see beyond that really central, basic delusion that we are the centre of the universe. What is so special about me that I only look after myself? And then this stream of mental moments I call my mind. These ever-changing elements I call my body are not some separate thing that exists in its own right. So who is this separate person that someone's suffering belongs to? Suffering is just suffering. It has no owner. I should relieve it just because it is suffering. So once again, relating the Bodhisattva ideal to non-self. This stream of mental moments I call my mind, these ever-changing elements I call my body, are not some separate thing that exists in its own right. They are part of a much larger flux of events. So why would we just focus on ourselves? Why would we draw the boundaries of our concern there? Who is this separate person? That separate person does not really exist. And then, moving on, those who have developed their mind in this way, those who feel this joy in releasing others, they are the ones who are truly fulfilled. What is the point of some cold liberation just for oneself alone? So he's telling us here, this focus more on others is not a way of making ourselves unhappy. It's not a way of martyring ourselves. In fact, being more about others is the way to be truly fulfilled. Those who have developed their mind in this way, they are the ones who are truly fulfilled. Our happiness comes from being connected to others and the world around us, because that's the reality. It does not come up from being cut off from others and the world around us. This is a cold, unhappy state. What is the point of some cold liberation? Just for oneself alone. And then he moves on. whoever longs to quickly save themselves and others should practice this supreme mystery, exchanging self and other. All the suffering in the world comes from obsession with ourselves. All the joy in the world comes from wanting others to be happy. Why say more? The fool looks out for his own benefit. The sage acts for the benefit of all. Just look at the difference between us. So to cure my own suffering as well as the suffering of others, I devote myself to others and will see them as myself. From now onwards, the welfare of all beings is my concern. So he's saying here, again, this is not some way of making oneself unhappy. This is not some way of giving ourselves a hard time. All the joy in the world comes from wanting others to be happy. All the joy in the world comes from connecting, not from separating. Why say more? The fool looks out for his own benefit. The sage acts for the benefit of all. So to cure my own suffering as well as the suffering of others, I devote myself to others. He's relating the two. The two go hand in hand. Being more about others is also the way to be happy with ourselves. So those are a few verses from the Bodhicharyavatara, which I think bring out these two aspects of the Bodhisattva ideal. The fact that it's actually the way to happiness to be more connected to others, more about others, and separately that it's an expression of wisdom. It's an expression of the wisdom of our relatedness, the fact that we do not exist as separate, independent existence. Okay, so what can we take away from this? What can we use practically in our own practice? I mean, obviously there's enormous amounts. It's just about a spirit, if you like. But how can we bring a bit more of that spirit, that bodhisattva spirit in our practice? Our first suggestion would be to think about the effect we have on others, to reflect on the effect we have on others, and really connect with that as a motivation for practice. So reflect on what effect do we have on our friends and loved ones when we are irritable, when we are anxious, when we are distant and unavailable, when we are just wrapped up in our own concerns. What effect do we have? And in contrast, what effect do we have on our friends and loved ones when we're happy and not weighed down by our obsessive thoughts? What effect do we have on our loved ones when we're loving, when we're unreactive and calm, when we act with wisdom, when we bring sense into situations? What effect do we have then? And how much do we want to be a positive factor in those lives, in the lives of the people we really like and love? How much do we want not to be a negative factor? And if we can reflect on this, we might reflect on that in the Metta Bhavana, and connect with that as a motive for practice. A motive to meditate, a motive to do the things that nurture us rather than the things that put us in a bad state, and a motive to spend time around the Sangha and people who put us in a positive state, a motive to stay in touch with what's best in us, and to act from what's best in us. It can actually be, I find that it can actually be quite a powerful motivation, the effect I'm going to have on others rather than me wanting to be happy. Sometimes, if I'm in a sort of a bit of a rough state, to be honest, I can't be bothered to change. I'm like this, well, I don't care. But if I know I'm going to be with others, it puts a different dimension on it. It actually is a real motivation to do something about it. So maybe connecting with that, the effect we have on others, and the effect we could have if we grew beyond some of our limitations. Say in our home and our workplace, what would it be like? What would a Buddha be like in that situation? What could we develop? What could we work on to have a positive effect in those environments? Another thing I would suggest is to stay in touch with the extent to which we are helped and dependent and supported by others. Stay in touch with the fact that we don't exist as separate, independent individuals. And I think a really good way to do this is to do the gratitude exercise that we do in the intermediate course. Some of you will remember that quite clearly because you haven't done it that long ago. We sit down and we just think, I'm going to write a list for 10, 15 minutes of all the people who have benefited me. And we start with perhaps mum and dad, and we go on, 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 and we go on. And the limit is how aware we are, actually, because we are all just kept in existence and benefited so much by such a web of human help, really. We are formed, helped, kept in existence by others. So I'd really suggest doing something like that exercise regularly, or including it in our metta-bhavana practice. Perhaps, maybe every week sit down and think, well, who's benefited me this week? Certainly including it in our metta practice. And then allowing our awareness of the benefits we've received from others to fuel our motivation to contribute something in our turn, not just to be on the receiving end of benefits. And lastly, to apply that awareness of our dependency on others, how we're supported by others, and our desire to be a positive aspect in that, not just to be getting, but to be giving as well. Apply that to the Sangha. We all depend on the Sangha in terms of our spiritual practice. I'm going to say none of us will get anywhere without it. And maybe there's some spiritual super person here who will, but generally, none of us are going anywhere without the Sangha, right? We're totally dependent on it. We're so much enmeshed in our context. We're so much enmeshed in the context in which we live that we cannot... the two have to change together. For us to become more enlightened, we have to be part of a more enlightened community. So we all depend on the Sangha if we want to grow and make progress. So my suggestion would be to bring this sort of gratitude exercise, this awareness of our dependency, into our relationship with the Sangha by making building Sangha part of our practice, creating Sangha, building Sangha, just being part of the Sangha as a part of our practice. It's a big aspect of the way we try to put the Bodhisattva ideal into practice in Triratna. We're very big on Sangha, and we're very big on that as, if you like, a practical aspect of the Bodhisattva ideal. Because we are not just practicing to become enlightened ourselves. We are practicing to become a more enlightened community. And we all need this. We all need this more enlightened community to become more enlightened ourselves. Because we don't exist separately. So our practice needs to be not just about me becoming more enlightened, it's about us becoming more enlightened. And the more we focus on the us rather than the me, the more the me will benefit. So ways we make practicing, ways we make building Sangha part of our practice. Take part in the Sangha. Just come, be part of things. Keep up our personal practice of ethics, meditation, listening to the Dharma, studying the Dharma. Relate to each other from what is highest in ourselves and relate to the other person in terms of what's highest to them. And all of that will help to create this more enlightened community. And that needs to be part of our practice, because what is the point of some cold liberation just from oneself alone?